The room went silent the second it happened, not the kind of silence that fades, but the kind that suffocates every breath in the air. 1 second, drinks were flowing, laughter echoing through the walls, and eyes casually watching the night unfold, and the next? Pure chaos. Because no one, absolutely no one, expected Yandy Smith to lose control like that. It all started with a glance. A lingering, too comfortable, way too familiar glance from Erika, the kind that doesn't just cross a line, it erases it completely. And who was on the receiving end? None other than Mendeecees Harris, Yandy's husband. At first, it seemed harmless. A laugh here, a touch on the arm there. But then the whispers began. Guests started noticing. Phones subtly came out, eyes shifted, the energy in the room turned thick, like everyone knew something was about to explode, but no one wanted to be the one to say it. And then, it happened. A sharp sound cracked through the room. A slap. Not subtle, not accidental, not misunderstood. Yandy's hand connected with Erika's face, and just like that, the entire night spiraled out of control. Gasps filled the air, drinks dropped, someone screamed, and in the middle of it all stood Yandy, breathing heavy, eyes blazing, while Erika clutched her cheek in shock, disbelief written all over her face. But here's the real question that has fans completely shaken. What exactly did Erika do that pushed Yandy to that breaking point? Because insiders are saying, this wasn't just about flirting. This was personal. The tension didn't come out of nowhere, it had been building all night like a storm waiting for the perfect moment to break, and everyone in that room felt it long before that slap echoed across the walls, because Erika wasn't just laughing at something Mendeecees said, she was leaning in too close, letting her hand rest just a little too long on his arm, her voice dropping into that soft tone that instantly made heads turn, and while some people tried to brush it off as harmless fun, others knew exactly what they were witnessing, because Yandy had been watching the entire time, not blinking, not moving, just observing every second like she was collecting evidence, and the moment Mendeecees smiled back just a little too comfortably, something inside her snapped, you could see it in her eyes, the shift from calm to something far more dangerous, and the people closest to her started whispering, trying to calm her down before things escalated, but it was already too late, because Erika didn't stop. In fact, she leaned in even closer, her laughter louder now, almost like she was putting on a show, and that's when Yandy finally moved, stepping forward slowly, her heels clicking against the floor with a precision that made the entire room fall silent mid-conversation. Conversations died, drinks paused halfway to lips, and all attention turned to the unfolding confrontation, because everyone knew this was about to go left real fast. Yandy stopped just inches away from Erika, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. You real comfortable right now, huh? And for a split second Erika froze, clearly not expecting to be called out so directly, but instead of backing down she smirked, tilting her head slightly as if she didn't see anything wrong with what she had been doing. Girl, it's not even like that, she replied, waving her hand dismissively, and that right there was the spark that ignited everything, because Yandy's expression hardened instantly. Not like that, she repeated, her tone rising just enough to send chills through anyone listening. You got your hands on my husband, laughing all up in his face like I'm not standing right here, and it's not like that. And Mendeecees, who had been silent up until this point, finally stepped in, trying to diffuse the situation. Babe, it's nothing, you're overthinking, he said, reaching out toward Yandy, but she pulled back quickly, her eyes never leaving Erika. Oh, now I'm overthinking, she shot back, her voice dripping with disbelief. So this is normal to you, this is respect? And Erika crossed her arms, now clearly annoyed by the confrontation. You doing too much, she snapped back. It was just a conversation, and the way she said it, the attitude, the lack of accountability, it only made things worse, because now it wasn't just about what happened, it was about the blatant disrespect unfolding in front of everyone, and the crowd started reacting, some whispering, some pulling out their phones, others trying to quietly step away, but no one was really leaving, because this was the kind of drama people don't walk away from. And Yandy could feel all eyes on her, the pressure, the humiliation, the anger, all mixing into one explosive emotion. And then Erika made the mistake that changed everything. She laughed again, but this time it wasn't playful, it was dismissive, almost mocking, and in that exact second Yandy's restraint disappeared completely. Her hand moved faster than anyone could react, connecting with Erika's face with a force that sent shockwaves through the room. The sound alone was enough to make people gasp out loud, and Erika stumbled back slightly, her hand instantly flying to her cheek, her eyes wide in disbelief like she couldn't process what had just happened. And for a moment nobody moved, it was like time itself had frozen in that exact second, and then chaos erupted, voices overlapping, people shouting, some trying to separate them, others just watching in pure shock, and Mendeecees stepped between them, now his face tense, his voice raised. Yandy, what are you doing? But she wasn't backing down, not now, not after everything. Don't touch me, she snapped, pulling away from him, her focus still locked on Erika, who was now regaining her composure, slowly her expression shifting from shock to anger. Oh, you really just did that, Erika said, her voice shaking slightly but growing louder with every word. You just put your hands on me? And Yandy didn't flinch. Yeah, I did, and I'd do it again, she fired back, because you clearly don't understand boundaries. And the room fell into a new kind of silence, not the calm one from before, but a heavy charged silence filled with anticipation, because it was clear this situation was far from over. And Erika stepped forward, now close closing the distance between them again. You're gonna regret that, she said, her tone low but threatening, and Mendeecees immediately tried to step in again, holding his hands up like he was trying to control a fire that had already spread too far. Both of y'all need to chill, he insisted, but neither of them were listening because at this point it wasn't about him anymore, it was about pride, respect, and the line that had been crossed in front of everyone. And Yandy leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make people lean closer to hear. Try me, she said, and that single moment, that single exchange was enough to split the entire room into sides, because now it wasn't just an argument, it was a full-blown conflict with people choosing who they believed, who they supported, and who they thought was completely out of line. And whispers started spreading instantly, some saying Erika had been pushing it all night, others insisting Yandy went too far, letting her emotions take control. And right in the middle of it all stood Mendeecees, looking more uncomfortable than ever, because no matter what he said or did, he was already at the center of something much bigger than he anticipated. And as security finally started moving and sensing that things could escalate even further, one thing became painfully clear: this was not just a moment of drama, this was the beginning of something that was about to unravel in ways nobody in that room was prepared for. The moment security stepped closer, it didn't calm anything down, it only made the tension feel even more real, like this wasn't just a heated argument anymore, this was an incident, something that people would be talking about long after the night ended. And Erika wasn't backing down, not even a little. In fact, the more people tried to hold her back, the more she pushed forward, her voice rising over everyone else. You embarrassed yourself tonight, she shouted, pointing directly at Yandy like she wanted every single person in that room to witness her response. And Yandy let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it, just pure disbelief. Embarrassment? You think this is embarrassing? She shot back, stepping forward again despite hands trying to keep her in place. You flirting with my husband in my face like I'm invisible? That's embarrassing. And the crowd reacted instantly. You could hear the gasps, the whispers, the low murmurs spreading like wildfire, because now the accusations were out in the open and there was no taking them back. And Mendeecees ran his hands over his face, clearly frustrated, clearly overwhelmed. Man, this is getting blown out of proportion, he muttered, but that only made things worse because both women turned toward him at the exact same time, like his words had just added fuel to an already raging fire. Blown out of proportion, Yandy repeated slowly, her eyes narrowing. So now it's nothing again, now I'm just making it bigger than it is. And Erika folded her arms again, but this time there was a smugness in her expression, like she felt validated by what he said. See, even he said it, she added, and that was the moment something shifted in Yandy completely, because it wasn't just about Erika anymore, now it felt like betrayal coming from both sides, and you could see it in the way her posture changed, the way her voice dropped lower, calmer but far more dangerous. Oh, so now y'all on the same page, she said, shaking her head slowly. That's what we doing tonight? And Mendeecees stepped forward quickly. No, that's not what this is, don't twist it, he insisted, but it was too late, because once that idea planted itself in Yandy's mind, there was no pulling it out, and people around them started choosing sides more openly now, some of Yandy's friends stepping closer to her, whispering in her ear, trying to calm her down, while others looked at Erika like she had completely crossed a line. And Erika noticed it too, the way the energy in the room started shifting against her, and instead of backing off, she doubled down. Oh please, she scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear, y'all acting like I did something crazy, it was a conversation, y'all are so dramatic. And that word hit like a trigger, because the second it left her mouth, Yandy's expression snapped again. Dramatic? You wanna see dramatic? She said, stepping forward so fast security had to react immediately, placing themselves between them, but even that wasn't enough to fully separate the energy, because both women were still trying to get closer, their voices overlapping, the crowd getting louder, phones now fully out recording every second, because this had officially become a spectacle. You don't get to play innocent, Yandy continued, raising her voice over the noise. You knew exactly what you were doing from the moment you walked in here. And Erika shook her head, laughing again, but this time it sounded forced, like she was trying to maintain control over a situation that was slipping through her fingers. You really think I came here for your man? She shot back. There are plenty of men in this room, let's not flatter yourself. And that comment sent another wave of reactions through the crowd, because now it wasn't just disrespect, it was direct insult. And Mendeecees looked caught in the middle, his eyes moving between both women like he was trying to figure out how things spiraled this far, this fast. Can we just stop this right now? He said, raising his voice slightly, trying to regain some control, but neither of them were listening, because at this point the damage was done. And Yandy turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable but her voice sharp. You real quiet earlier when she was all up on you, she said, and that line right there shifted the focus completely, because now all eyes were on him, waiting for his response, waiting to see which side he would lean toward. And for a second he hesitated, just long enough to make it worse. I didn't think it was that serious, he finally said, and the second those words came out, you could practically feel the room react, because that was not the answer anyone expected. And Yandy's face fell for a split second, not in sadness but in realization, like everything just clicked into place. Oh okay, she said softly, nodding her head. Now I see see exactly what this is in. Erika watched that exchange closely, her expression changing slightly like even she didn't expect that response, and suddenly the confidence she had earlier started to waver because now the situation wasn't just about her anymore, it was exposing cracks in something much deeper, and the whispers in the room grew louder. Fans are shocked, some voices said under their breath, emotions ran high, others added, and the family was left divided became the unspoken narrative forming right there in real time, and one of Yandy's close friends finally stepped in, grabbing her arm gently. Come on, let's just go, this isn't worth it, she whispered, but Yandy didn't move, her eyes still locked on Mendeecees like she was searching for something, anything that could explain what she just heard. Say it again, she said quietly, and he frowned, confused. What you mean, he replied, and she took a step closer. Despite everything, despite everyone. Say it again, she repeated louder this time. You didn't think it was that serious, and now all attention was back on him, the pressure, the weight of the moment sitting heavy on his shoulders, and he hesitated again, and that hesitation said more than any words could because Yandy let out a slow breath, stepping back slightly, shaking her head. Yeah, that's what I thought, she said, and for the first time since the argument started her anger shifted into something colder, something more controlled, which somehow felt even more intense than before, and Erika looked between them, clearly sensing that the situation had evolved into something she might not be able to control anymore. Look, this is getting weird, she muttered, trying to brush it off again, but her voice didn't carry the same confidence as before, and Yandy turned toward her one last time, her expression calm but her words cutting. You inserted yourself into something that had nothing to do with you, she said, and now you don't like how it feels, and Erika opened her mouth to respond but paused like she couldn't find the right comeback this time, and that silence spoke volumes because for the first time all night she didn't have the upper hand, and the room felt it, the shift, the change, the realization that this wasn't just about flirting anymore, this was about respect, loyalty, and something much deeper unraveling right in front of everyone. And as security continued to hover nearby, unsure if things were truly over or just temporarily paused, people started slowly stepping back, creating space but not leaving because nobody wanted to miss what happened next, and Mendeecees stood there caught between the aftermath of two completely different reactions, one explosive and one dangerously quiet, and if there was one thing everyone in that room could agree on, it was that the silence coming from Yandy now was far more unsettling than the slap that started it all. And just when it seemed like things might finally settle down, Erika let out a quiet scoff, shaking her head like she couldn't let the last word go. Y'all really doing the most over nothing, she said under her breath but loud enough for Yandy to hear, and that was the mistake that reignited everything because Yandy stopped mid-step, turning slowly, her eyes locking onto Erika again, and this time there was no yelling, no immediate reaction, just a calm, measured stare that made people hold their breath because they could feel it. Something else was coming, something nobody was ready for, and Yandy took one step forward, then another, her voice low but steady. You still don't get it, do you, she said, and Erika rolled her eyes but didn't respond immediately, like she was weighing whether to continue or walk away, and that hesitation created a moment of stillness in the room, the kind where even the smallest movement felt amplified, and then Erika made her choice. She stepped forward too, closing that distance again like she refused to back down from anyone, especially not Yandy. Say what you gotta say, she replied, crossing her arms again, but this time there was a flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes, and Yandy leaned in just enough so only those closest could hear, but somehow the entire room felt the weight of her words. This was never about you, she said quietly, this is about him, and the second she said that, everything changed again because now the focus snapped right back to Mendeecees, and the tension that had been building beneath the surface finally started to crack open in a way that no one could ignore anymore. And the second those words landed, the entire energy in the room shifted again because now it wasn't just about a slap or flirting or even disrespect anymore. This had turned into something much deeper, something personal, something that had clearly been building long before tonight, and all eyes went straight to Mendeecees Harris because whether he wanted it or not, he was now standing in the center of a storm he helped create, and you could see it all over his face, that mix of frustration, guilt, and pressure that comes when there's nowhere left to hide from the truth. And Yandy Smith didn't raise her voice this time, didn't move aggressively, didn't even glance at Erika again, because in that moment Erika had become irrelevant. This was about what had been ignored, what had been tolerated, what had been quietly building behind closed doors, and the room felt it instantly, the shift from loud chaos to something far more uncomfortable because now it felt real. And Yandy folded her arms slowly, her voice steady but sharp. You stood there, she said, looking directly at him, and watched her disrespect me and said nothing. And Mendeecees exhaled heavily like he already knew whatever he said next wasn't going to fix anything. I told you it wasn't serious, he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction, like even he didn't fully believe it anymore, and that only made things worse because Yandy let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head not in humor but in disbelief. You keep saying that like it makes it better, she replied, her tone cutting deeper with every word. It wasn't serious to you because you weren't the one standing there being made to look stupid, and that line hit hard because people around them started reacting again, whispers rising, fans are shocked, someone muttered under their breath, emotions ran high, echoed from another corner, and the family was left divided. Wasn't just a phrase anymore, it was happening right there in real time because even their closest friends didn't know who to support anymore. And Mendeecees stepped closer, lowering his voice voice like he was trying to keep things from escalating again. "You're taking this too far," he said, but Yandy didn't back up, didn't soften, didn't break eye contact. "No, you didn't take it far enough," she shot back instantly, and that response caught him off guard because it wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity, and clarity in moments like this is what makes everything fall apart. And for a second he didn't have anything to say, and that silence said more than any explanation could, because Yandy nodded slowly like she just got confirmation of everything she had been feeling for a long time, and Erika, who had been standing just a few steps away watching all of this unfold, now looked visibly uncomfortable because this wasn't the drama she signed up for anymore. This was something deeper, something messier, something that exposed more than just a moment of bad judgment, and she tried to step back quietly like she wanted to remove herself from the situation, but it was too late because people had already formed their opinions, some blaming her for starting it, others realizing this situation had roots that went far beyond her presence. And one of the guests whispered she didn't break anything that wasn't already cracked, and that comment spread quickly because it felt true, and Yandy heard it too. You could tell by the way her expression tightened slightly, but she didn't respond to it directly. Instead, she kept her focus locked on Mendeecees like she was finally done ignoring the bigger issue. "Tell me something," she said, her voice lower now but somehow louder than all the shouting from before. "When did I become someone you don't feel the need to defend?" And that question hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said all night, because it wasn't about Erika anymore, it wasn't about the slap, it was about respect, loyalty, and the foundation of their relationship. And Mendeecees looked at her like he was searching for the right answer, but nothing came out right away, and that delay, that hesitation, only confirmed what she already felt. "I do defend you," he finally said, but it sounded weak even to him, and Yandy shook her head immediately. "No, you defend situations, you defend excuses, you defend everything except me," she replied, and the raw honesty in her voice made the entire room go quiet again, because this wasn't performance, this wasn't reality TV drama anymore, this was real emotion spilling out in front of an audience that suddenly felt like they were witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. And Erika crossed her arms again, but this time it wasn't out of attitude, it was out of discomfort, like she didn't know where to stand or what role she played in this anymore. And someone in the crowd muttered, "This went too far," and someone else whispered, "Or maybe it finally went where it needed to go," and both statements felt equally true, because what started as a confrontation had now turned into a full exposure of cracks that couldn't be ignored anymore. And Mendeecees ran his hands over his face again, clearly overwhelmed. "Look, we not doing this here," he said, trying to regain some control, but Yandy wasn't having it. "No, we doing this right here, right now," she replied immediately, "because this is where it happened, this is where you chose to stand there and let me look crazy." And her voice didn't rise, but the intensity behind it made people lean in closer, because every word felt like it mattered. And Mendeecees stepped even closer, lowering his voice again like he was trying to keep this between them. "You think I would ever disrespect you like that?" he asked, and Yandy didn't hesitate. "Yes," she answered, and that one word hit harder than anything else because it was simple, direct, and undeniable. And the room reacted again, gasps, whispers, tension building like a wave ready to crash. And Erika finally spoke up again, but this time her tone was completely different, softer, uncertain. "Look, I didn't mean to cause all this," she said, and for the first time all night she sounded genuine, but it was too late because the damage was already done. And Yandy glanced at her briefly before looking back at Mendeecees. "This was never about her," she repeated quietly, and that statement settled everything because it made it clear that no matter how this started, the real issue had nothing to do with Erika anymore, and everything to do with what had been left unsaid for far too long. And the crowd could feel it, the shift from chaos to confrontation, from spectacle to something deeply personal and uncomfortable, and nobody knew what would happen next because there was no script for this, no predictable ending, no easy resolution, just two people standing in front of each other with everything hanging in the balance. And the weight of that moment felt heavier than the slap that started it all, because this was the part where things either broke completely or somehow found a way to survive. And as the silence stretched longer than anyone expected, Mendeecees finally spoke again, his voice lower, more serious than before. "I didn't realize you felt like that," he admitted, and Yandy let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly. "That's the problem," she said, "you never do." And that line landed like the final crack in something that had already been breaking, because now it wasn't about one night, one argument, or one mistake. This was about a pattern, and everyone in that room could see it, even if they didn't fully understand it. And Erika slowly stepped further back, now completely removed from the center of attention, because this wasn't her fight anymore, this was something much bigger and much deeper. And the people around them exchanged looks, some uncomfortable, some captivated, because they knew they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about long after tonight ended. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more intense, Mendeecees took a step back himself, creating distance between them, like he needed space to process everything. And that movement alone spoke volumes, because for the first time all night he wasn't trying to fix it, he wasn't trying to control it, he was just standing there facing the consequences of everything that had unfolded. And Yandy watched him carefully, her expression no longer angry but resolved, like she had finally reached a point where there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to argue, just a decision waiting to be made. And the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, filled with everything that had been said and everything that still hadn't been. And in that moment everyone in that room knew this wasn't over, not even close, because what started as a slap had turned into something far more serious, something that would carry long after the night ended. And as people slowly began to step back, giving them space but still watching, still listening, one thing was painfully clear: the real fallout had only just begun. And that silence didn't break quickly, it stretched out heavy and suffocating, like the entire room was holding its breath waiting to see who would move first. And Yandy Smith didn't rush, didn't react, didn't fill the space with noise the way she had earlier. Instead, she just stood there looking at Mendeecees Harris like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in a long time, and that kind of stillness made people even more uncomfortable because emotions ran high when voices were loud, but this kind of quiet, this kind of calm meant something had shifted permanently. And Mendeecees shifted his weight slightly, glancing around at the crowd like he was suddenly aware of how public this had become, how many eyes were watching, how many phones were still recording every second, and you could tell he wanted control back over the situation, but control was long gone. And somewhere in the back someone whispered, "Fans are shocked," and another voice responded, "The family was left divided." And those words lingered because they weren't just commentary anymore, they felt like a summary of everything unraveling right in front of them. And finally Mendeecees spoke again, his voice slower, more careful than before. "We can talk about this later," he said, like he was trying to move the moment somewhere private, somewhere less exposed. But Yandy shook her head immediately. "No, there is no later," she replied, her tone firm but not loud. "You had your chance for later every time you chose silence." And that response hit differently because it wasn't fueled by anger anymore, it was built on reflection, on all the moments that led to this one. And Erika, standing off to the side now, completely removed from the center of the storm, let out a small breath like she realized she had walked into something far more complicated than she ever expected. And for the first time all night she didn't interrupt, didn't defend herself, didn't laugh, she just watched quietly like everyone else, because now this wasn't entertainment, this was reality. And one of Yandy's friends stepped closer again, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this here," she whispered. But Yandy didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break her focus, because for her this wasn't about the room anymore, it wasn't about the crowd, it wasn't even about the embarrassment, this was about closure, or at least the beginning of it. "Tell me something," she said again, her voice softer now but somehow heavier than before. "If I wasn't standing here tonight, how far would that have gone?" And that question cut deeper than anything else because it forced a truth that couldn't be easily dodged. And Mendeecees looked at her like he was searching for an answer that wouldn't make things worse, but the hesitation alone was enough to say everything. And Yandy nodded slowly like she expected that exact reaction. "Yeah, that's what I thought," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just acceptance. And that acceptance felt final, like a door quietly closing rather than slamming shut. And the crowd reacted in a different way now, no longer loud, no longer chaotic, just murmurs, low whispers, because everyone could feel that something bigger had just been decided without needing to be announced. And Mendeecees took a step closer again, his voice dropping even lower. "Don't do this," he said, but Yandy shook her head again, already stepping back slightly. "No, you already did," she replied, and that line landed heavy because it made it clear this wasn't about a decision she was making in the moment, this was about something that had been building for a long time and had finally reached its breaking point. And Erika shifted uncomfortably again, glancing toward the exit like she wanted to disappear from the situation entirely, because the weight of what had unfolded was no longer something she could brush off or laugh through. And one of the guests muttered, "This is bigger than we thought," and someone else responded, "It always is," and both statements felt painfully accurate because what started as a single moment of tension had turned into a full exposure of everything beneath the surface. And Mendeecees exhaled again, running his hands over his face like he was trying to process everything all at once. "You're really gonna let this situation tear everything apart?" he asked, and Yandy tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but her words sharp. "This situation didn't tear anything apart," she said, "it revealed what was already broken." And that line sent another wave through the room because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't exaggerated, it was honest. And honesty in moments like this hits harder than anything else, and people could feel it, some nodding slightly, others looking away because it felt too real, too personal, too close to something they might understand themselves. And the energy in the room shifted again, not explosive, not chaotic, just heavy, like everyone was witnessing something they weren't sure they should be seeing. And Mendeecees stood there silent for a moment longer, like he was finally realizing that this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. And Yandy took another small step back, creating space not just physically but emotionally, like she was already distancing herself from everything that had just happened. And her friend gently guided her arm again, this time she didn't resist, and that small movement spoke volumes because it showed she was done, not in anger, not in defeat, but in clarity. And Erika watched that moment carefully, her expression softening slightly, like she understood that whatever part she played in this story, it was over now, and not in the way she expected. And the crowd slowly began to shift, people stepping back, lowering their phones, whispering among themselves because the intensity had changed. It wasn't loud drama anymore, it was quiet fallout, and that kind of fallout lingers longer than any argument ever could. And Mendeecees looked at Yandy one more time, his voice quieter than it had been all night. "We can fix this," he said, but there was uncertainty in it now, doubt creeping in where confidence used to be. And Yandy paused for just a second, glancing back at him, time, and for a moment it felt like time slowed again, like maybe there was something left unsaid, something that could change the direction of everything. But then she shook her head slightly. Not this way, she replied, and those 3 words felt like the final confirmation that whatever they had just experienced wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. And she turned away fully, this time taking a step toward the exit, her friend walking beside her, while the room watched in silence because nobody wanted to break that moment, nobody wanted to interrupt what felt like the end of something significant. And Erika stepped even further back, now completely out of the center of attention, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by a quiet awareness of the impact of everything that had happened. And Mendeecees stood there alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by people but completely isolated because the weight of what had just unfolded was now sitting entirely on him. And as Yandy reached the edge of the room, she paused briefly, not turning around, not saying anything, just standing there for a second like she was taking in everything that had just happened. And then without another word she walked out, and the sound of that door closing echoed louder than the slap that started it all, because this wasn't just about what happened in that room, this was about everything that would come after, and the people left behind could feel it too, the uncertainty, the questions, the reality that this story wasn't over, not even close, because when something like this breaks, it doesn't just end, it continues, it spreads, it lingers. And as the crowd slowly began to disperse, whispers followed them out the door, fans are shocked, emotions ran high, the family was left divided, and nobody could say for sure what would happen next. But one thing was undeniable, this night had changed everything, and there was no going back to what it was before, because some moments don't just pass, they redefine everything that comes after. And even after that door closed, the energy in the room didn't release, it just shifted into something heavier, something harder to ignore, because now everyone was left standing in the aftermath, trying to process what they had just witnessed. And Mendeecees Harris didn't move at first, he just stood there frozen, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. And for the first time all night there was no one arguing with him, no one pulling him in different directions, no chaos to hide behind, just silence. And that silence forced him to sit with everything he had said, everything he hadn't said, and everything he had allowed to happen right in front of him. And you could see it slowly hit him, the realization that this wasn't just about one moment, this was about a pattern, a series of choices that had finally led to a consequence he couldn't ignore. And across the room Erika shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now that the attention had turned into something deeper, something she could no longer laugh off or dismiss. And she crossed her arms, but this time it wasn't defensive, it was uncertain, like she didn't know where to stand anymore or what to say, because whatever role she thought she was playing earlier had completely changed. And one of the guests nearby leaned toward another, whispering, "Fans are shocked," and the response came quietly but clearly, "Yeah, because nobody thought it would go this far." And that was the truth, because what started as a spark had turned into a full explosion, exposing things nobody expected to see unfold in public. And Mendeecees finally exhaled heavily, dragging his hands down his face again before pacing a few steps forward, then stopping like he didn't even know where to go next. And one of his friends stepped up cautiously, trying to break through the tension. "You good?" he asked, but Mendeecees didn't answer right away, because what answer could he give? Nothing about this situation was good, and the pause alone said everything. Before he finally shook his head slightly, "Nah," he muttered under his breath, and that single word carried more weight than anything he had said all night, because it was the first honest response he had given. And across the room Erika let out a small sigh, stepping closer, but not too close, like she was testing the space, trying to figure out if she even belonged in the conversation anymore. "Look," she started, her voice quieter than before, "I didn't mean for any of that to happen." And for a moment it seemed like maybe she was trying to take some accountability, but Mendeecees didn't even look at her right away, because his focus was somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the room, beyond the people, beyond the noise. And when he finally did glance in her direction, his expression wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was distant, like whatever had just happened had pulled him out of the moment completely and into something far more serious. And that reaction alone made Erika hesitate, because she realized she wasn't the center of the problem anymore, she was just part of the situation that exposed it. And emotions ran high earlier, but now it was something different, something quieter, something that lingered under the surface. And one of the women near the back shook her head slowly. "The family was left divided," she murmured, and someone beside her nodded, because it wasn't just about two people anymore, this was bigger than that, it affected everyone connected to them, everyone who had been watching, everyone who had been involved. And Mendeecees finally spoke again, his voice low but steady. "I should have handled that different," he admitted, and that admission didn't come with excuses, didn't come with deflection, it just sat there heavy and real. And the people close enough to hear it exchanged looks, because it was the first moment of clarity he had shown all night. And Erika looked at him carefully, like she was trying to understand what that meant for her position in everything. "So what now?" she asked quietly, and that question hung in the air, because there was no easy answer, there was no clear next step, just uncertainty stretching out in front of them. And Mendeecees shook his head slightly. "I don't know," he said, and that honesty again made the situation feel even more real, because for once he wasn't trying to control the narrative, he was just acknowledging that things had gone too far and that he didn't have a solution ready. And one of his friends stepped in again, trying to lighten the tension. "Just a little, man, just give it some time," he suggested, but even that sounded weak compared to the weight of what had happened, because time doesn't fix everything, sometimes it just makes things clearer. And across the room people were already pulling out their phones again, not to record but to text, to call, to spread what they had just witnessed, because moments like like this don't stay contained, they travel fast, they grow, they evolve into something even bigger once the story leaves the room. And Erika looked around, noticing the shift, noticing the whispers, noticing the way people were already forming their own versions of what happened, and for the first time she looked genuinely uneasy. This is about to get messy, she muttered, and no one disagreed because it already was messy and it was only going to get worse once it hit the outside world. And Mendeecees stopped pacing, finally planting his feet like he was trying to ground himself, trying to make sense of everything before it spiraled even further. And he pulled out his phone, staring at the screen for a moment like he was debating whether to call Yandy or give her space, and that hesitation spoke volumes because it showed he knew whatever he did next mattered more than anything he had done earlier. And the room slowly started to empty, now people drifting out in small groups, still talking, still processing, still replaying every second in their minds because nobody was going to forget this, not anytime soon. And as the crowd thinned, the atmosphere changed again, becoming quieter, more intimate, more reflective, and Erika finally stepped back, completely heading toward the exit herself without another word because she understood now that her presence wasn't needed anymore. Whatever role she played in starting this, she wasn't part of how it ended. And Mendeecees watched her leave briefly before looking back down at his phone again, his thumb hovering over the screen like he was stuck between action and hesitation. And one of his friends nudged him lightly. You gonna call her or what, he asked, and Mendeecees exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said, but he didn't dial immediately because deep down he knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. This wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a quick explanation or apology. This was something deeper, something that required more than words. And outside the building, the night air felt completely different from the tension inside as Yandy Smith stepped out, her expression calm but her mind clearly racing because even though she had walked away physically, the emotional weight of everything still lingered. And her friend stayed close beside her. You okay? She asked gently, and Yandy nodded slowly but didn't speak right away because sometimes being okay doesn't mean everything is fine, it just means you've accepted what you can't change. And after a few seconds she finally spoke. I think I already knew, she said quietly, and her friend looked at her confused. Knew what? She asked, and Yandy took a slow breath before answering. Knew that something wasn't right, I just didn't want to see it like this. And that honesty hit just as hard as anything that had been said inside because it revealed that this moment wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. And back inside, Mendeecees finally pressed the call button, lifting the phone to his ear as it rang and rang and rang, but there was no answer. And that silence on the other end felt just as loud as everything that had happened earlier because it made one thing painfully clear: this wasn't going to be fixed in a single conversation. And as he lowered the phone slowly, the reality of the situation settled in deeper than before because some moments don't just pass, they change everything. And this was one of those moments where nothing would ever be exactly the same again. And even though the night was technically ending, the real story was only just beginning. And as the night stretched on, it didn't calm anything down, it only gave everything more time to sink in, more time to spread, more time to grow into something even bigger than what had already happened. Because by the time Yandy Smith got into the car, the story was already moving faster than anyone could control, messages lighting up, phones, notifications stacking one after another, clips being shared, angles being debated, people picking sides without even knowing the full truth. And inside that car the silence felt just as heavy as the chaos she had just left behind. Her friend glanced over at her again. You want to talk about it? She asked softly, but Yandy just stared ahead for a moment, her jaw set, her expression unreadable before finally exhaling slowly. There's nothing left to talk about, she said, and even though her voice was calm, the weight behind it made it clear this wasn't just frustration, this was finality. And back inside the building, Mendeecees Harris was still standing there, phone in hand, staring at the screen like he was hoping it would change, like somehow she would call back or text or give him something to work with, but nothing came. And the longer that silence lasted, the more real everything became. And one of his friends shook his head slightly. This is gonna be everywhere by morning, he muttered, and that wasn't speculation, that was a guarantee, because moments like this don't stay private, not anymore, not when everyone had a camera, not when everyone had an opinion. And Erika, who had already stepped outside, now leaned against the wall a few feet away from the entrance, scrolling through her own phone, her expression tightening with every swipe because she could already see it, the comments, the clips, the narratives forming, and none of them were simple, none of them were clean. And she muttered under her breath, this got out of control fast, but deep down she knew it didn't just get out of control, it revealed something that had been waiting to surface. And as she looked up briefly, watching people exit in small groups, whispering, talking, shaking their heads, she realized that no matter how she tried to explain her part in it, the internet wasn't going to wait for her version, it was already building its own. And inside, Mendeecees finally started moving again, pacing slower this time, more deliberate, like every step carried the weight of what he needed to figure out next. And another friend stepped closer, lowering his voice. You gotta fix that, bro, he said, and Mendeecees nodded slightly but didn't answer right away because fixing something like this wasn't simple, it wasn't quick, and it definitely wasn't guaranteed. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. I don't even know if I can, he admitted, and that honesty honesty landed heavy because it showed that even he understood this might be beyond repair. And outside, the car engine started, but Yandy didn't tell the driver to move yet. She just sat there for a moment longer, her thoughts running through everything that had just happened, every word, every look, every pause. And what hit her the hardest wasn't the slap, wasn't the argument, wasn't even Erika. It was the realization in that moment when she asked a simple question and didn't get the answer she needed, because sometimes it's not what someone does, it's what they fail to do that changes everything. And her friend finally reached over, placing a hand gently on her arm. "You don't deserve that," she said, and Yandy gave a small nod, not in agreement but in acknowledgement, like she understood something now that she couldn't unsee. And as the car finally pulled away, the distance between her and that night grew. Physically but emotionally it stayed right there, heavy, unresolved. And back inside, the last few people were clearing out, the staff beginning to reset the space like nothing had happened, but the energy lingered in the walls and the air, in the conversations that would follow long after the lights dimmed. And Mendeecees stood there one last time, looking around at the now nearly empty room, and for a moment it felt surreal, like everything had happened too fast, but also like it had been building forever. And he pulled his phone out again, scrolling through messages, seeing his name, seeing her name, seeing clips already circulating, and his expression tightened, because now it wasn't just personal anymore, this was public, and that changes everything. And outside, Erika pushed herself off the wall, taking a deep breath before walking toward her car as well, her steps slower than before, her confidence replaced by something more cautious, because she knew this moment would follow her too, in ways she didn't expect. And as she got inside, she glanced at her reflection, briefly shaking her head like she was trying to process how quickly things escalated from a simple interaction to something that would now define the narrative around her. And as she drove off, the street behind her filled with people, still talking, still reacting, still replaying the moment over and over again, because drama like this doesn't fade quickly, it grows and spreads and takes on a life of its own. And by the time the night fully settled into early morning, the story had already reached places far beyond that room. Fans are shocked, comments flooded in, emotions ran high, headlines formed, the family was left divided, became the dominant narrative, and everyone had an opinion, everyone had a theory, everyone believed they understood what really happened, even if they only saw a few seconds of it. And in her car, Yandy finally looked down at her own phone, seeing the same flood of reactions, the same clips, the same conversations, but she didn't open any of them, she didn't respond, she didn't engage, because for her this wasn't entertainment, this was real, and no amount of online noise could change what she felt in that moment. And she leaned back slightly, closing her eyes for a second, taking a breath like she was preparing herself for what came next, because she knew this wasn't the end, this was just the beginning of a much bigger fallout. And back in his own car, Mendeecees finally sat down, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before letting out a long breath and staring straight ahead, because no matter what anyone else said, no matter how the story was told, he knew one thing for sure: he had a role in what happened, and now he had to face whatever came after. And the silence inside that car felt heavier than anything else, because it wasn't filled with noise or distraction, just thought after thought, replaying every second. And as the sun slowly began to rise, hinting at a new day, the reality of the situation settled in completely, because nights like this don't just disappear with daylight, they carry over, they reshape things, they force decisions that can't be undone. And somewhere between that quiet drive and the growing noise of the outside world, one truth became impossible to ignore: this wasn't just about a slap, this was about everything that came before it and everything that would come after. And no matter what anyone said next, no matter how anyone tried to explain it, nothing would ever go back to the way it was before that moment exploded in front of everyone. And by the time the morning fully settled in, the situation had already taken on a life of its own, because clips were everywhere, slowed down, replayed, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame, with people debating every expression, every movement, every second, like they were trying to uncover a truth that only the people in that room could actually feel. And the narrative kept shifting depending on who you asked, some saying Yandy Smith was justified, others insisting she went too far, while a growing number started focusing on Mendeecees Harris, questioning his silence, his reactions, his role in everything. And that pressure didn't stay online, it followed them into real life, into conversations, into messages, into spaces they couldn't control. And Yandy sat in a quiet room later that morning, her phone face down on the table, because she already knew what was on it. She didn't need to see it to understand how big this had become. And her friend sat across from her, watching carefully. "You can't ignore it forever," she said gently, but Yandy shook her head slowly. "I'm not ignoring it," she replied, "I'm just not letting it define me." And that distinction mattered, because while the world outside was turning this into a spectacle, she was trying to hold on to something real, something grounded, something that didn't get lost in the noise. And at the same time, across town, Mendeecees was dealing with a completely different kind of pressure. Calls coming in non-stop, messages from friends, from family, from people asking questions he didn't have clear answers to. And one call in particular made him pause before answering, because he already knew what it was about. And when he finally picked up, the voice on the other end didn't waste time. "What happened last night?" The question came direct and heavy, and he exhaled slowly, trying to find the right way to explain something that didn't feel simple anymore. "It just got out of hand," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt incomplete, because nothing about what happened was just something getting out of hand, it was layers, it was history, it was choices, and the voice on the other end responded immediately, nah, that ain't all it was. And that response hit because it reflected exactly what he was starting to realize himself. And back with Yandy, another message lit up her phone, this time from someone close, someone whose opinion mattered, and she picked it up, slowly reading the words twice before setting it back down, and her expression didn't change much, but there was a shift, a deeper understanding settling in, because the reactions weren't just coming from strangers, they were coming from people who knew them, who had seen things before, who had noticed patterns that maybe she had chosen to overlook. And emotions ran high, wasn't just something people were saying online, it was something she was living through in real time. And her friend leaned forward slightly. What are you thinking, she asked, and Yandy took a slow breath before answering. I'm thinking this didn't start last night, she said, and that statement carried everything because it acknowledged what many had already begun to suspect. This wasn't a random explosion, it was a breaking point. And outside, the conversations kept growing, people discussing not just the slap but the relationship, the dynamics, the moments that led up to it. And the family was left divided became more than a phrase, it became visible in real time as different sides formed, different perspectives clashed, and the story continued to evolve with every new detail that surfaced. And Erika, watching all of this from her own space, felt the pressure too, because even though the focus had shifted, she was still part of the narrative, still being mentioned, still being judged. And she sat there scrolling through comments, her expression tightening with each one, because no matter how she tried to explain it, people had already made up their minds. And she finally set her phone down, shaking her head. This is crazy, she muttered, but deep down she knew this wasn't just about perception, it was about impact, and impact doesn't disappear just because intentions are explained. And back with Mendeecees, he finally ended that call but didn't move right away, just sat there letting the silence settle again, because every conversation he had only seemed to make things clearer and heavier at the same time. And he leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling like he was replaying everything again, but this time without the noise, without the crowd, without the chaos, just the truth of it. And that truth was harder to face than anything else, because it meant acknowledging not just what happened but why it happened and what it revealed. And across town, Yandy finally picked up her phone again, scrolling briefly, not through everything, just enough to confirm what she already knew. And she saw the clips, the headlines, the opinions, and instead of reacting, she locked the screen again, placing it down with a quiet finality, because she understood something now that no comment section could change. Her clarity didn't come from what people were saying, it came from what she experienced. And her friend watched her closely. You gonna talk to him, she asked, and Yandy paused for a moment before answering. Not until I know what I need to say, she replied, and that response showed growth, control, intention, because this wasn't about reacting anymore, this was about deciding. And back with Mendeecees, he picked up his phone again, staring at her name for a long moment before typing a message and deleting it, then typing again, because finding the right words felt impossible when the situation itself didn't have a simple explanation. And after a few seconds, he finally sent something short, something direct, something that didn't try to fix everything at once. And then he waited, and that waiting felt longer than anything else, because it carried uncertainty, hope, and the possibility that things might not go the way he wanted. And time passed, not fast, not slow, just enough for everything to feel suspended. And when his phone finally lit up again, his expression shifted slightly as he read the message, and it wasn't long, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't detailed, it was simple: we'll talk later. And those three words held everything, because they didn't promise resolution, they didn't offer forgiveness, they just left the door open slightly. And sometimes that's all there is after a moment like this, not closure, not answers, just the possibility of what comes next. And as both of them sat in their separate spaces processing everything, the world outside continued to react, continued to speculate, continued to build a story around them, but the real story, the one that mattered, the one that would decide everything, wasn't happening online, it was happening in the quiet moments, in the decisions yet to be made, in the conversations that hadn't happened yet. And as the day moved forward, one thing became clearer than ever: this wasn't the end of the drama, this was the beginning of something far more complicated, something that would test everything they thought they understood about each other. And no matter how it played out, no matter what decisions were made next, the truth of that night would always remain a turning point, a moment that changed everything and left everyone watching, wondering what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the real conversation finally begins. And as the day stretched into evening, the anticipation only grew heavier, because now it wasn't about what happened anymore, it was about what was going to happen next. And the entire situation felt like it was sitting on the edge of something bigger, something final, something that couldn't be undone. And in a quiet space away from the noise, Yandy Smith sat across from Mendeecees Harris for the first time since everything exploded, and there were no cameras, no crowd, no whispers, just the two of them and the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, because sometimes the hardest part isn't the argument, it's the silence that follows it, the moment where there's no distraction left, just truth waiting to be faced. And Mendeecees finally broke it, his voice low, measured. I never wanted it to go like that, he said, and Yandy didn't react immediately. She just looked at him like she was trying to see past the words and into what they actually meant. Intentions don't change impact, she replied calmly, and that line landed heavy because it cut through any attempt to soften what happened. And he nodded slowly, like he knew that already, like he had been sitting with that realization all day. I should have stepped in, he admitted, and she tilted her head slightly, not in surprise but in acknowledgement, because that was the first time he said it clearly. clearly without excuses, without deflection, and that mattered more than anything he had said before, but it still wasn't everything and you didn't, she responded simply, and that simplicity carried more weight than any long explanation because it pointed directly at the gap between what should have happened and what actually did, and he exhaled again, leaning forward slightly like he was trying to close that distance between them both physically and emotionally. I didn't think it would turn into all that, he said, and Yandy's expression shifted just a little, not angry, not emotional, just tired, and that tiredness spoke volumes because it meant this wasn't just about one night, this was about a pattern of underestimating moments that mattered. You didn't think, she repeated softly and then shook her head slightly. That's the problem, you never think until it's already too late, and that line didn't come out sharp, it came out honest, and honesty in that moment felt heavier than any argument they could have had. And he ran his hands together, slowly looking down for a second before speaking again. I get it now, he said, but even as he said it there was uncertainty because understanding something after it happens doesn't undo it. And Yandy leaned back slightly, crossing her arms, not defensively but protectively, like she was holding her space now instead of fighting for it. Getting it now doesn't fix it, she replied. And the room fell into another quiet pause because both of them knew that was true, and outside of that room the world was still spinning, still reacting, still building narratives, but in here none of that mattered. This was about them and what came next. And Mendeecees looked up again, his voice more serious than before. So what are we doing, he asked, and that question felt bigger than anything else because it wasn't just about the relationship, it was about the future, about whether there even was one after this. And Yandy didn't answer right away. She took a breath, looking away for a moment like she was choosing her words carefully because this wasn't a moment to react, it was a moment to decide. And when she finally spoke her voice was steady. I'm not walking away because of one night, she said, and for a split second there was relief in his expression, but it didn't last because she wasn't finished. I'm stepping back because of what that night showed me, she continued, and that clarification changed everything because it meant this wasn't forgiveness, this was distance, this was evaluation, this was her taking control of something she felt slipping away before. And he nodded, slowly processing that, trying to understand what it meant in real terms. So what does that look like, he asked, and she met his eyes directly. It looks like space, she said. It looks like you figuring out why you stood there and said nothing, in me figuring out why I accepted that kind of silence for so long. And that answer didn't come with anger, it came with clarity, and clarity in moments like this is what shifts everything because it removes the chaos and replaces it with something far more real and harder to ignore. And Mendeecees leaned back slightly, absorbing that because this wasn't something he could argue with, this wasn't something he could talk his way around, it was something he had to face. And the room stayed quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy with tension, it was heavy with understanding, the kind that doesn't feel good but feels necessary. And after a few seconds he spoke again, softer than before. I don't want to lose this, he said, and Yandy's expression softened just a fraction, not enough to change her stance but enough to show that the emotion was still there beneath everything. I don't want to lose myself either, she replied, and that line landed as the final truth of the moment because it made it clear that whatever happened next had to be different, had to be better, had to be built on something stronger than what they had before. And outside the reactions continued. Fans are shocked, people still saying emotions ran high, others repeating the family was left divided, but inside that room none of those phrases mattered anymore because this wasn't about perception, this was about reality. And as the conversation slowed down both of them sat there understanding that this wasn't an ending and it wasn't a clean resolution, it was a turning point, the kind that forces change whether you're ready for it or not. And after a long pause Yandy finally stood up, not in anger, not in dismissal, just in decision. I need time, she said, and he nodded without arguing because for the first time he understood that pushing for an answer wouldn't help. And as she turned to leave she paused for just a second, not looking back but not rushing out either, like she was acknowledging that this moment mattered. And then she walked away, and this time it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, intentional and final in a way that felt even more powerful. And Mendeecees stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the space where she had just been, because now everything depended on what happened next. And outside the world would keep talking, keep speculating, keep building stories, but the real outcome wouldn't be decided there, it would be decided in moments like this, in conversations like this, in choices made when no one else was watching. And as the night settled in again, one truth remained clear, this situation didn't end with a slap, it didn't end with an argument, it didn't even end with that conversation, it opened something, it exposed something, and what came next would determine whether it all fell apart or finally changed for good. And just like that, what started as a single moment of tension turned into something nobody saw coming, a night filled with accusations, betrayal, and emotions that spiraled completely out of control. Fans are still shocked, trying to piece together what really happened, while others are asking the bigger question, was this just a breaking point or the beginning of the end? Because even after everything we've seen, there are still so many unanswered questions. Will Yandy truly walk away, or is there still a chance for her and Mendeecees to rebuild what was broken? And what about Erika? Was she really just caught in the middle, or did she know exactly what she was doing? The truth is, this story is far from over, and if anything it's only getting deeper from here. Emotions ran high, the family was left divided, and the fallout is still unfolding in real time. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Yandy justified, or did things go way too far? Should Mendeecees have stepped in sooner, and do you believe this relationship can survive after everything that just happened? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is not ending anytime soon. And if you want more explosive drama just like this, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next, because trust me, you don't want to be the one catching up after it's already gone down.